Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com. I want to do a quick video to kind of talk about my thoughts on the Amazon deal and it falling apart, and it's no longer happening in New York. So let's talk about sort of what the deal was. So basically what happened is that Amazon needs more headquarters. So it needs more locations across the country for a lot of operational things, beyond just the warehouses that it has across the country, and its current HQ in Seattle. Now, oftentimes when businesses seek vendors, in this case, the vendor is really the state that they locate in, they put it out for bids. So when they're looking for someone to provide X service, they put it out for bids. So this is just sort of natural business practice to sit there and have their vendors compete against each other. So I can understand sort of the logic of sitting there saying, hey, which state would like to have us physically located in there? Give us your proposal, whatnot. Now, always the issue with that is that once you start to ask politicians, because politicians aren't necessarily, they're not a business in the traditional sense. They're managing other people's money that's not theirs. They don't have a stake in the profits or losses. They don't often get measured by the profits and any kind of profit or loss. So oftentimes they can kind of spend other people's money, confiscate other people's property, and do all sorts of kind of things that are really bad, with very little consequence. So when you start having business sort of coordinate its own interests with politicians, it can lead to some very, very bad outcomes. We can see this in sort of what's happened in our current state of criminal justice with the way prisoners are treated in prisons, or the state of agriculture where subsidies have really distorted the prices of foods that we eat, leading to unhealthier decisions. There's all sorts of different examples where you can see this. But my big issue with New York specifically, being someone who's lived in New York for the last 10, 11 years, is that the taxes in New York are high. The cost of doing business in New York are high. The regulatory and the compliance costs to comply with those regulations is very high. It's near impossible to run a viable business in New York because you have all these high costs. And the thing is that it's also the same thing for individuals who are getting taxed really high and then have to pay a high cost of living, so they don't have money to be paying increased prices to give the profit margins to these companies to deal with the costs. So it basically cannibalizes itself in New York. So the businesses that do generally survive here are either businesses that are very large corporations because they can actually get favors from government, to basically pay less taxes and have relief from a lot of these burdens so that they can function profitably here. Or if you are a business that falls into particular classes that get subsidies, benefits, and whatnot. And again, it's not just because you have a good business idea, often has to do with like who's running your business, who's involved in your business, what your business is for. So basically, if you're not in one of these sort of politically favored groups either, or politically powerful groups, then it's near impossible to start a business in New York City, or to really survive New York City these days. So when people talk about the size of the subsidy to New York, the reason why the subsidy seemed so astronomically large in New York was because what the New York government takes from businesses to begin with is so large. And that's the part where I feel like a lot of people have missed the story. So I agree with the criticism that government and business shouldn't be in bed with each other, and that's a bad sign. But in New York, basically the burden of the New York government has made it impossible for that to happen. And that wasn't sort of the lines that a lot of the conversation was. Basically, now that Amazon has pulled out of the deal with New York, the takeaway that most people have taken away was, well, New York doesn't take enough from businesses, that they need to impose more regulations and make sure that they pay their fair share, meaning that not only should they be bringing jobs to the local community that brings incomes, which does result in more taxes because those people pay income taxes when they go patron other New York businesses. So those people who work at Amazon are going to go eat at local restaurants, go to local grocers, take the subway and help cover the cost of the MTA, which that's a whole other problem. So you have all these sort of new sources of revenue. And again, this isn't money coming from out of state, because the money to fund that is coming from the sales of Amazon across the country, across the world. So you're bringing money to the state in a sense. So economically, even if basically Amazon had to pay zero taxes to New York would still be better off with Amazon there in New York, there in Brooklyn, than without it. And that's the part that, again, I'm not heartbroken over this negotiation between business and government failed. I don't want that to be sort of the norm. It is the norm in New York, and that's the problem. The problem is that if we walked away from this, if Amazon pulled out, and then what we took away from this is that we're going to try to make New York a place where people can thrive and survive by getting rid of the burdens that burden individuals and businesses, then that was a fight well worth fighting. But the vibe I get is that that people are asking New York to put more burdens, to sit there and say, hey, we got to force businesses to pay taxes, to cover people's disability costs, to cover their maternity and paternity leave, to cover their child care, to cover all their expenses in life. And all that's going to be and the way it's always worked, like it's done with the recent maternity care bill and whatnot, those just become extra payroll deductions. So your employer will pay a little bit, but you will pay a little bit. And if you keep adding more, your income keeps shrinking, and eventually, not only does your income keep shrinking, but also your costs keep coming up around you, and New York just becomes a harder and harder place to survive. And it just keeps creating this cycle of people saying we need government to take more because we're having such a hard time surviving, but every time they take more, it becomes a harder place to survive. So so that was my gripe with everything. Hopefully this conversation gets better, but at the end of the day, you want people to, and again, it doesn't mean all states will suddenly, if every state got rid of most of their taxes and basically had lean governments as possible, doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be the most appetizing place to do business either. There's other factors that are unique to a business, such as access to bodies of water, access to different types of infrastructure, etc. All that does matter. Problem is when you build infrastructure for infrastructure's sake, so when people just build roads and say, hey, this is going to stimulate the economy, what happens is you're creating more infrastructure that has to be maintained. So you're increasing future maintenance costs in the future, which means when actual really good projects come up, you have less ability to do so because you're spending so much money to maintain. So often what happens is that we just keep building the new stuff and not maintaining the old stuff, and you end up with a situation like you have in New York City where the subways are just deteriorating, where most of the renovations on the subway have been more cosmetic and functional, but less, on its core, the tracks, the trains, more like, oh, we made the station look pretty. Oh, now you know how much time you have. Well, even though I do like the clocks that tell me how long I have to wait for a train, I would much prefer that the trains had better tracks, better cars, so that way they would break down less. And then also some of that money has just gone to pet projects from different governors, different mayors, etc. So this is New York. So basically the reason why I'm very upset about this is that it's sort of the straw that broke the camel back for me to lose faith in New York. Basically, realizing that basically things have to get a lot worse in New York before they're going to get any better. So yeah, where should I go? I'll let you guys in the comments tell me where you think I should go. Ciao. This is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com.